Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a slightly windy field in 1815. The ground under your boots is damp. Cannon smoke still lingers in the air like a forgotten campfire. And in the distance, a small object tumbles end over end through the churned up grass. It's not a cannonball or a secret dispatch or even someone's missing saber. No, it's a hat, a very famous hat, two-cornered, weather-beaten, and absurdly dramatic. Yes, tonight we follow Napoleon Bonaparte's hat, not the man. Too much yelling, marching, and conquering. We're here for the hat. Because the moment it flew off his head during the Battle of Waterloo, it accidentally began one of history's most bizarre logistical nightmares. A saga of impersonators, overzealous collectors, and thousands of confused postal workers. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this hat's itinerary. Too many customs forms. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and what time it is where you're listening. I love seeing how far these little sleep journeys travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. South, there it goes. Napoleon's hat ripped off his head by a sharp gust as he turns to bark orders. It sails dramatically through the air like it knows it's about to be famous. Officers dive for it, soldiers point and gasp. One overly excited drummer boy tries to chase it, only to trip over a cannon wheel and sprain his ankle. He'll claim he saw the emperor's soul rise up, but really, he just hit his head. The hat disappears into the grass for a moment, and for a few minutes, just a few, it's gone. Lost to the world, then it's found. A Belgian farmer picks it up while inspecting his churned up fields the next day. He doesn't even know what it is at first, just a weird squash felt triangle that smells like cologne and leather. He uses it to keep the sun off his onions for the rest of the summer. Then a traveling historian spots it. The farmer shrugs. Take it, it smells funny anyway. Thus begins the hat's post-Napoleonic journey, one mostly spent not on heads, but in parcels, crates, museum basements, and a suspiciously moldy biscuit tin. You follow this hat's adventures like a sleepwalking mail clerk, drifting from address to address, stamp to stamp. The trouble is, Napoleon owned at least 120 bicorn hats during his reign. They were identical, black beaver felt, flat front and back, worn sideways. Not the usual corner forward look that screams party pirate, but he made it his trademark. So after Waterloo, everyone wanted a piece of that look. And the postal services of Europe, they suffered for it. Within 10 years of Waterloo, the French post office alone had processed more than 70 separate packages labeled Bonaparte's true hat. Some were sent to museums, some to private collectors. One was mailed anonymously to a mayor's office with a note that just said, "Glory demands it." Another showed up in a bakery stuffed with almond pastries. Postal workers were not amused. They began keeping a quiet log, the chapeau incidents. One postmaster near Lyon recorded this gem in 1823. Received again, hat number 11, smells of mothballs and vinegar. Return to sender, sender unknown, hat remains. But the hat, the real one, it kept moving. By the time you reach the 1830s, it's passed through 6 countries, 3 embassies, and at least 2 hat repair shops. One of those shops in Milan still claims it has an original Napoleon hat pin, which it displays next to a portrait of someone who is definitely not Napoleon. Historians still argue whether the hat that surfaced in Brussels in 1821 was the original Waterloo hat. It had the right stains, the right lining, and even a faint imprint from where Napoleon's signature lock of hair might have rested. But then again, so did four others. That's when the postal problems really begin to escalate. More on that in the next section. But for now, you lie back, eyes gently drooping, imagining this silly, stern little hat floating through the ages, from onion patches to velvet museum boxes, from cannon fire to confused customs agents with very tired eyes, and all because the wind decided at just the right moment to snatch it off Napoleon's head like a kid stealing a cookie. You're now somewhere in the early 1840s, trailing behind a velvet-lined trunk being offloaded from a coach in Paris. The driver mutters something about another blasted hat. Inside the trunk, cushioned in straw and dramatically overwrapped in lavender-scented silk, sits a two-cornered relic. Label, authentic bicorn of Emperor Napoleon, handle with reverence. The box has been mailed once again to the Musée de l'Armée, and once again, curators gather around it with the enthusiasm of people who've seen far too many suspiciously authentic hats. Because here's the thing, the bicorn wasn't just Napoleon's accessory, it was his asterisk symbol. The silhouette alone, narrow, flattened, worn sideways, could evoke an empire. He never adorned it with feathers or medals. It was plain, black, and iconic. A conscious choice, a branding decision centuries before influencers made it cool. He reportedly ordered about 12 new bicorn hats per year, all made by the same hat maker, Poupard of Paris. So yes, technically, dozens of real Napoleon hats existed, but only a few were worn during major campaigns, like Austerlitz, Jena, or of course Waterloo. Those are the ones collectors fought over, and by fought we mean dramatically sighed and wrote long letters on expensive stationery. No swords, just bureaucracy. You glide past drawing rooms and dusty auction halls, where the hat's legend grows with every passing year. One gentleman in Vienna swears the hat speaks to him. A duchess in Prague refuses to eat dinner unless the hat is displayed on a velvet pedestal nearby. Children sneak into parlors to dare each other to touch it. One licks it on a dare. He is grounded until his mustache comes in. And then the copies begin. At first it's harmless. A few hat makers in France start selling Napoleonic-style bicorns to tourists. But soon, things get more ambitious. An enterprising haberdasher in Marseille claims he inherited one directly from a Bonaparte cousin, though the hat smells suspiciously of chimney soot and cheap wine. A tailor in Brussels adds secret stitching to his hats that says Empereur Authentique. One bold hat from London contains a tiny scroll inside that reads, "Blessed by Napoleon's own barber." By the mid-19th century, there are at least 43 hats circulating Europe with plausible but contradictory claims to being the one, and people believe them, because what better way to own a piece of greatness than to pop it on your head while trimming the hedges? You pause now, picturing a rotund Bavarian librarian solemnly watering his geraniums in full Napoleonic regalia. That image alone is almost enough to put you to sleep. But the hat you're following, the possible Waterloo hat, has problems of its own. By 1850, it's gone through at least 6 owners, each convinced they've found the real deal. One collector even arranges for a hat duel, a contest where rival hats are judged by scent, stitching, and sweatband decay. Nobody wins. One hat catches fire after someone gets too close to a lamp. The French state grows increasingly annoyed. Letters flood in. Is this the real one? Why is there one in Vienna and another in Turin? What about the one buried in someone's garden in Nantes? Historians still argue whether any of the hats preserved in French museums today are truly the Waterloo hat. The Musée de l'Armée claims one. So does a private estate in Normandy. And somewhere in Prague, an unlabeled hat in a bakery attic draws curious glances from tourists who whisper, "It smells imperial." Meanwhile, the Postal Service, silent heroes of this slow brewing chaos, start filing hat protocols. You drift past one sleepy clerk in Lyon who, in 1854, writes, "Received yet another item claiming Bonaparte lineage, felt weak, brim uneven, box stamped Napoleon, spelled incorrectly, possible forgery, filed under H with the others." You can't help but imagine the postal shelves, row after row of nearly identical hats, each labeled with increasingly desperate notes. "Smells like cinnamon." "Suspicious glue underlining." "Definitely not the one from March." They start passing internal jokes. One mailman refers to a difficult delivery as another Waterloo situation. A Parisian sorting room holds an unofficial vote. Which hat would you trust to command a cavalry charge? The winner had a jaunty bend and a small wine stain, and still the hat travels, carefully boxed, reverently passed hand to hand, each new owner certain they've found the one relic that saw an empire fall. You picture it resting on someone's mantle now, quietly gathering dust beside a porcelain cat and a bowl of sugared almonds. Or maybe it's in a drawer, folded between love letters and unpaid bills, its shape warped, its mystery still intact, and you, adrift in this cozy absurdity, feel your breath slow just a little. The hat's journey is only beginning, and your pillow feels like a velvet cushion fit for royalty. By now, your sleepy mind is probably wondering, if there were so many hats, how did anyone tell them apart? That's the problem. They didn't, or rather, they tried, which made everything worse. You shuffle into the 1860s where a new trend emerges: hat authentication. Not by scholars, mind you, but by self-appointed hat examiners who charge a small fee to pronounce your bicorn, either blessed by Napoleon himself or just a particularly dignified pigeon. There's Claude. Remember Claude. He's a tailor in Dijon with an honest face, a penchant for chestnut cake, and absolutely no expertise in historical millinery. But he does own a magnifying glass and speaks with a dramatic flourish. Soon he's offering consultations. For 3 francs, he'll inspect your hat and declare its historical worth. By candlelight, of course, for ambiance. One by one, hopeful owners parade their bicorns to him. He sniffs the felt. He squints at the stitching. He mutters things like, "Ah, yes, a faint scent of battlefield brandy," or "the left brim shows signs of imperial anxiety." People love it. Claude becomes famous or infamous, depending on who you ask. Historians still argue whether Claude ever actually authenticated a real Napoleon hat. One scholar insists he got close once, very close, but dropped the hat into a soup pot during lunch and was too embarrassed to admit it. Meanwhile, imitations flood the streets. You pass a street vendor in Bordeaux selling Bonaparte hats for gentlemen of taste. The hats are stiff, uncomfortable, and oddly shaped, like someone copied the silhouette from memory after a long nap. But they're popular. People love feeling connected to greatness, even if the connection comes with a sweatband and lopsided stitching. Postal workers, however, are not impressed, and it starts with a trickle. A single bicorn arrives at the Lyon depot with the note, "To be forwarded to Napoleon's tomb with honor." It's returned naturally. Then another package arrives, addressed to whichever historian deserves this most. No return address, no postage paid, inside a hat and a half-eaten biscuit. Soon the mail becomes clogged with mystery hats, some boxed, some wrapped in newspaper, one taped to a decorative plate. A postal supervisor in Marseille writes, wearily, "This week, 6 hats, 4 unmarked, 1 with a feather, likely not original, and one containing a live snail. Unsure whether snail was intentional, postal facilities begin labeling the backlog. They invent categories like probable hat, dubious hat, and strong smell. Do not open indoors. Clerks joke that they could stage their own Napoleonic reenactment using nothing but the unclaimed hats in storage. You pass through a sleepy mailroom now, where the hats sit piled in dim corners like strange slouching crows. A breeze rustles the brims. One clerk swears he saw one twitch. It gets worse when the British get involved. British collectors, already obsessed with Napoleon memorabilia, begin trading hats across the channel. And when you're mailing a very old, very fragile bicorn from London to Calais, things get delicate. In 1872, one ambitious collector decides to ship what he believes is the Waterloo hat to a colleague in Geneva. He wraps it in wool, boxes it with straw, and scrawls, "Handle with historic respect," on every visible surface. The package takes 3 months, 6 reroutes, and one suspicious detour through a fish market before arriving, crushed, damp, and partially pecked by birds. The recipient files a formal complaint. The hat is now shaped like a collapsed souffle. I am enraged, but respectfully. You imagine the poor courier trying to explain to Swiss customs why a damp, smelly triangle of fabric deserves diplomatic protection. Still, the hats keep coming. One delivery boy, worn down by years of weirdly weighted parcels and fussy signatures, begins preemptively stamping all hat boxes, return to sender, too much drama. He's later reprimanded, promoted, then quits to write poetry about mailbags. And you? You're floating through this all like a drowsy pigeon on a lazy breeze. The slow swirl of felt and glue, wool and wine, the absolute absurdity of a world in which hats generate more paperwork than treaties, and still no one knows which one is the real deal. At night, Claude the tailor sometimes dreams of hats that whisper to him. One says it witnessed Austerlitz, another claims to have sat on Josephine's lap. Claude wakes up sweating, unsure if he's cursed or merely overworked. The funny thing is, every time someone thinks they've found the hat, another one surfaces. It's like trying to crown a ghost. You might touch something real, or you might just be admiring 200-year-old theater props. But sleepier now, you imagine yourself walking a dark hallway lined with glass cases. In each one, a nearly identical hat sits on a pillow, lit from above like a relic of the saints. Each claims truth. Each dares you to believe, and none of them snore, thank goodness. You step gently into the 1880s now, where the hat hysteria is no longer just a collector's quirk. It's become a proper European obsession. And like all good obsessions, it spawns bureaucracy. Enter the Ministry of Historical Artifacts, Department of Millenary Provenance. That's not a joke. Well, not entirely. The French government, exhausted by decades of hat-related petitions, finally decides to do something official. A committee is formed. You picture a long table in a chilly Parisian office, surrounded by men with mustaches and very serious eyebrows. Their task? To locate, document, and possibly rank every surviving hat attributed to Napoleon. They begin with a map. Pins go into it like sleepy acupuncture. Lyon, Bordeaux, Vienna, Brussels, Geneva, St. Petersburg, even Cairo. Each pin marks a hat. Some are housed in private collections. Others gather dust in libraries, bakeries, or attics where no one remembers who put them there. One, charmingly, is displayed in a pub in Sussex where patrons can try it on if they promise to drink absinthe afterward. The committee sends out questionnaires, delicate formal letters asking collectors to describe their hats in detail, dimensions, stitching, material, any known travel history.
The responses come in, and you trail behind them like a ghost in a filing cabinet. Some are detailed, slightly singed on one brim, worn at battle, or possibly too near a fire. Others are poetic. When I hold it, I feel a strange pull, as if to destiny. One is unhelpfully vague. It is hat-shaped. The committee attempts to grade them by likelihood. They use a point system, extra points if it came directly from a known associate of Napoleon, if it resembles Poupar's handiwork, or if it smells like saddle leather and regret. Historians still argue whether this committee actually identified the most authentic hat. Some say yes, it resides in Paris today. Others argue that too much was based on anecdote, not fact, and that the committee members grew bored and started awarding points for dramatic flair. One hat receives bonus points for coming with a short opera written in its honor. Another loses points after the owner confesses it once served as a dog bed. Meanwhile, the Postal Service continues to groan under the weight of hat diplomacy. You drift into a mailroom in Rouen, where a special shelf has been designated Napoleonic suspicious. The shelf bows under the weight of oddly shaped parcels wrapped in lace burlap and one, memorably, in cabbage leaves. No one wants to open them anymore. That year, a crate marked Hat of the True Emperor is delivered to the Musée d'Orsay. When opened, it contains not a hat, but a loaf of stale bread carved into a bicorn shape. No explanation, no sender. Just a note. The Emperor rises again. You picture the curator staring at it in silence for a long, long time. More confusing still is the case of the traveling hat, one that seems to move entirely on its own. No one claims to own it, yet it arrives, unrequested, at several French institutions over the course of 6 months. It always comes in the same battered box, with no return address. Curators begin to dread the sight of it. Eventually someone bolts it into a glass case just to keep it from wandering again. By now the story is legend. A generation of sleepy French school children grow up thinking Napoleon had only one hat, which somehow lives forever, like a felted ghost haunting the bureaucracy of empire. You pause to imagine Napoleon himself watching all of this from some celestial armchair. Perhaps he's amused, perhaps he's shouting, "It was the gray one, you fools!" But no one can hear him, except maybe Claude, who still dreams of whispering hats. Even outside France, the obsession spills over. In Japan, a museum briefly exhibits what it claims is Napoleon's campaign hat, gifted by a French collector during a diplomatic visit. The exhibit includes incense, watercolors, and a small mechanical diorama of the Battle of Austerlitz. A visiting scholar politely questions its authenticity, but the local guide simply bows and says, "In spirit, it is true." That, you think, is probably the best answer yet. By the late 1880s, you find yourself in a strange, calming paradox. Everyone wants the real hat, yet no one seems to agree what real even means anymore. Provenance bends under the weight of nostalgia. And in that dreamlike haze, the hats begin to blur together. Not in a bad way, but like stars in a sky too wide to measure. Each hat becomes its own little constellation. You imagine drifting past each one as if in orbit. Some sit proudly in museums, guarded by alarms and velvet ropes. Others perch quietly on mantelpieces beside dusty books and forgotten clocks. One rests in a shoebox beneath a child's bed, folded in tissue paper and surrounded by marbles, all of them waiting, all of them dreaming of battlefields and coronations, of horses and cannon fire, of empire and exile. But you're just floating past, half asleep, wrapped in the soft wool of centuries, and warmed by the strange comfort of a world that once took its hats very seriously. You drift softly into the early 1900s now, where the world is modernizing, but the Napoleon hat problem refuses to go away. Trains are faster, telegrams buzz with urgency, and yet somewhere in the sleepy back room of a dusty Alpine post office, a mail clerk is staring blankly at yet another hat. It's in a fruit crate lined with lavender sprigs. The address simply reads, "Return to Glory." And here you thought only cats return to their previous owners uninvited. The clerk doesn't bother filing a complaint. He just labels it Emperor Miscellaneous and adds it to a growing pyramid of unwanted parcels that smells faintly of mothballs and myth. Across the sea, American collectors are starting to take interest. You find yourself gently on the swaying deck of a steamer ship bound for New York. On board, a velvet-lined case containing what the seller claims is Napoleon's personal dinner hat, which raises a sleepy eyebrow since, as far as historians can agree, the man didn't have a dinner hat, or at least not one used exclusively for chicken fricassee. Historians still argue whether Napoleon ever wore different hats for meals, but this doesn't stop a wealthy Boston banker from bidding $14,000 at auction. He installs the hat in a private salon where it sits under a dome of glass, surrounded by tiny spotlights and a faint scent of leather polish. Visitors are encouraged to bow respectfully before entering. This kicks off what newspapers dub hat fever. Auction houses thrive, catalogs are printed, velvet gloves are worn, and every few months someone unveils a new Napoleon hat. One is found inside a church organ in Bavaria. Another turns up at the bottom of an old trunk used by a traveling magician in Lisbon. That one is suspiciously glittery. You trail quietly through the rooms of these eager collectors. A judge in Montreal who swears his hat was used at Elba, a librarian in Oslo who believes her hat has emotional residue, a beekeeper in rural Italy who wears his during particularly stressful harvests. Everyone has a story, and you're there for all of them, floating past like a slow breeze through a century of misguided reverence. One collector, Mr. Pickering of Devonshire, goes further. He creates a hat genealogy. Using family letters, questionable handwriting analysis, and 3 seances, he produces a branching tree of all known bicorns. The tree includes marriages between hats for composite lineage, and a tragic orphaned brim found in a fireplace in Corsica. Mr. Pickering's work is widely mocked, but never entirely dismissed. Meanwhile, the French Postal Service quietly updates its internal classification system. Bicornies now warrant their own routing code. BICR1 is for clearly Napoleon-linked items. BICR-2 indicates hats of uncertain provenance but strong odor. BICR-3 means, "Please do not let this touch other mail." A clerk named Sabine writes a short poem about the chaos. So many hats, so few heads, all seeking glory in postal beds, wrapped in wool or paper thin. Each cries out, "I wore the emperor's chin." Her supervisor makes her erase the last line. By 1910, even school children are sending hats by mail. One box arrives containing a hat made of cardboard and pigeon feathers, with the note, "For Napoleon, should he return." P.S. Tell him we have bicycles now. And so the legend mutates. The hats aren't just relics anymore. They're talismans, little relics of ambition, nostalgia, and gentle lunacy. A sleepy kind of hope wrapped in felt and fantasy. You pass a quiet Paris cafe where elderly men argue softly over hat-related trivia. One claims Napoleon owned over 200 bicorns. Another insists he had only 7, but kept them in rotation like fine wine. A third nods solemnly and says, "I once wore one," in a dream. The cafe cat wears a tiny hat of its own. It looks smug. One museum attempts a comprehensive catalog. They hire experts, examine thread types, analyze dust particles. At night, the archivists go home dreaming of brim curvature and sweatband width. One eventually retires to become a landscape painter. Every painting features a mysterious hat-shaped hill in the distance. You, meanwhile, are growing heavier now, sleepier. The hats swirl around you like leaves in a slow-motion autumn. A scholar proposes a Napoleon hat convergence theory, the idea that all existing hats are somehow echoes of a single original, the one true hat, lost to time but reverberating through history like a felted bell. His colleagues laugh gently, but no one disproves him. After all, who's to say where a myth ends and a good nap begins? The year is 1921, and you're standing, ever so quietly, in the sorting room of the Paris Central Post Office. There's a plaque above the desk now. It reads, without irony, "Hat claims, third door on the left." And indeed, there is a door, worn, creaky, and slightly ajar, behind which one finds a single file cabinet labeled Bonaparte Related. The drawer sticks, it squeaks. It contains 17 folders, each one fatter than the last. Some are tied with ribbon. One smells unmistakably of lavender and goat cheese. You trail your fingers gently across the papers and let the stories exhale. A widow in Toulouse insists her husband's great-uncle's godfather was gifted a hat by Napoleon himself after they both accidentally dismounted their horses into the same puddle. Another file documents a spirited legal battle over a hat found in a laundry chute at a Viennese hotel. The hat had a note pinned inside reading, "This may not be his, but it should have been." You let that thought linger. A hat not worn by greatness, but deserving of it. Historians still argue whether any of these recovered hats bore Napoleon's actual head. At least one museum in Lyon quietly admits they've given up assigning certainty and simply call their exhibit "The Emperor's Many Hats," a title more honest than authoritative, but you don't mind. In fact, you're enjoying how delightfully ambiguous it all is. By the 1930s, replicas flood the market. Hat makers across Europe, especially in Belgium and northern Italy, begin selling authentic-style Napoleonic bicorns to tourists. They come in all sizes. Some are collapsible, some play music. One opens to reveal a hidden compartment for chocolates. A Parisian street vendor claims his hats are shaped with imperial angst. You watch a sleepy tourist try one on, then squint at himself in a bakery window. He smiles. He looks ridiculous and entirely pleased. A new form of postal nuisance is born, the return to sender emperor. These are bicorns mailed anonymously to unsuspecting recipients with cryptic notes like, "Time to take up your destiny," or "He left this with me, now it's yours." The recipients are understandably baffled. One reports the hat to the police, another frames the note and writes a short novel about it. Back at the postal headquarters, they create a new bin. Possible Napoleon return incidents. It shares shelf space with misdelivered Corsican artifacts and unexplained bees, a separate issue altogether. One particularly stubborn hat circles the globe 5 times in a year, passed along from post office to post office like a slow-moving diplomatic virus. By its final destination, Perth, Australia, it's accompanied by 11 forwarding slips, 4 apology notes, and a hand-drawn cartoon of a tired postal worker saying, "Not again." A museum in Chicago makes headlines when it receives a crate marked, "Napoleon's Lost Hat, Do Not Tilt." Inside is a hat perched on a pillow of shredded encyclopedias alongside a short message. It hummed once. Only once. But we heard it. No one knows who sent it or what it meant by hummed. You, of course, know that hats rarely hum, but this one might have, if only from exhaustion. By now, you're noticing something else. The tone of it all is softer, less combative. The world 2 decades after the Great War is bruised. People want their history to be less sharp, more comforting. They like the idea of Napoleon, not as conqueror, but as a man with cold ears and a preference for wide-brimmed felt. One retired general gives a speech in Marseille and finishes it by pulling out a hat and placing it gently on his head. He says, "We wear these not to fight, but to remember how silly men can be." The audience claps politely. Some dab their eyes. Someone sneezes into a napkin printed with the phrase, "Vive le chapeau." A sleepy rumor begins to spread that Napoleon didn't die at all, but simply vanished, leaving behind a trail of hats as breadcrumbs. He is said to appear from time to time in train stations or foggy alleys, tipping his brim and disappearing before anyone can snap a photo. An article in a local paper claims a cafe waiter in Dijon served him a pastry in 1933. The waiter describes him as short, stern, and very interested in apricot jam. No photo exists, but the hat, of course, was left behind. It's on display now in a glass box near the cafe's restrooms, labeled only possibly him. You're smiling now, half asleep in the folds of this long, ridiculous, strangely soothing tale. A world where hats carry stories, and the Postal Service is just trying its best to keep up. And deep down, it's not about the hat, not really. It's about what the hat means. Maybe it means ambition or memory or just a quiet excuse to nap in history's shadow. Whatever it is, it's featherlight, and you're wearing it now as you drift. The war ends, and so begins another chapter of the hat's long and winding journey, a time not of conquest, but of quiet reinvention. You find yourself now, not on a battlefield or in a dusty post office, but in a sleepy French farmhouse turned antique shop. The floor creaks. The walls smell faintly of linseed oil and bread. There's a sign out front that reads, "Relics and rubbish, 50% truth, 100% charm." Inside, you're drawn to the back shelf where, naturally, a bicorn sits beneath a glass dome. A handwritten card leans beside it. Hat once possibly touched by man who once possibly knew Napoleon. The price is negotiable. So is the truth. This is the post-war era when sentimentality and storytelling entwine like ivy. The world is rebuilding, factories resume production, jazz wafts from open windows, and somehow Napoleon's hats are still being mailed to the wrong people. In one particularly memorable case, a woman in Vermont receives a padded envelope containing what she describes as a very flat, very French triangle. Inside, a black felt bicorn, neatly folded with a note that reads, "It missed you." She has no idea what it means, but keeps it on the mantle for decades. Her grandchildren call it the sleepy hat. At a flea market in Brussels, a British tourist buys a rolled up poster, only to discover it's been wrapped around a soft, crumpled bicorn. No note, no markings, just the quiet aura of unresolved mystery. Historians still argue whether this era's hat sightings were mostly pranks, mislabelings, or deliberate forgeries. But one theory emerges that sticks like lint to wool. The hats have become a shared cultural dream. They appear not because they're found, but because they're needed. And you're beginning to feel it too. That cozy tug of imagination, that small belief that a story, if whispered gently enough, can become real. Meanwhile, postal museums begin to embrace their role in the saga. The Musée de la Poste in Paris opens a temporary exhibit titled "The Imperial Parcel, Napoleon in the Mailroom." It's unexpectedly popular. Children sketch their own bicorns on postcards. Retired mail carriers swap stories of mysterious packages and suspiciously lopsided boxes marked confidential. One exhibit includes a hat with an embedded compass and a tiny spoon tucked in the lining. The label reads, "For Conquest" or Camping. Elsewhere, a library in Canada compiles a hat incident archive with entries like 1948, hat arrives at Winnipeg post office containing 6 dried apricots and a single bullet casing. 1951, hat addressed to the real emperor, care of the winds, intercepted by confused park ranger. 1955, pair of bicorns arrive in Helsinki. One significantly smaller, possibly a matching set. You gently float past these records, amused by how earnestly the world has tried to catalog the uncatalogable. In quiet corners, poets and painters join the game. A Parisian poet publishes a slim volume titled Brim and Glory, including the haunting stanza, "A crown of cloth, a folded moon, sent not for war, but for a tune. It danced through rain, it slept in straw, and bore the weight of what men saw. The illustrations are dreamy. One shows a bicorn drifting through a sea of clouds. Another perches atop a scarecrow saluting an empty field. You begin to realize there is no single hat anymore. There are thousands, maybe millions. Not all are made of felt or thread. Some are stories. Some are jokes. Some are sleepy what-ifs whispered in the middle of the night when the world feels strangely soft and full of echo. In a tiny village in Portugal, an old man insists his roof tile is shaped like Napoleon's hat, and that rain sounds different when it hits it. No one corrects him. A newspaper runs the story with the headline, "History drips different here." And across oceans, in classrooms, children giggle through presentations where Napoleon wears sunglasses or launches his own brand of cereal. The hat, of course, is always present, sometimes enormous, sometimes upside down, once depicted as a flying saucer. The symbolism is unmoored now, but somehow that makes it stronger. Even the Postal Service begins to wink back. In 1962, a limited edition French stamp depicts a single bicorn sitting on a marble pedestal. The caption, "Too late to return to sender." Collectors rush to grab copies. Some mail them to themselves. And so, through it all, you continue your journey, not toward resolution, but deeper into the folds of the myth. You understand now, the real story isn't where the hat began, but how far people were willing to carry it, hoping for a sliver of something imperial, something absurd, something gently defiant. The decades glide onward, carrying you gently into the era of television and new communication wonders. The 1970s arrive with their peculiar fashions and even more peculiar fascination with the past. Napoleonic hats, naturally, make a modest comeback. You find yourself in a cozy living room, the faint hum of a tube television playing softly in the background. A documentary flickers on the screen exploring the curious case of Napoleon's hats. The narrator speaks in soothing tones, describing how hats once mailed from Corsica caused postal delays and mild confusion, often mixed up with actual mail, wrapped in layers of history and hope. You watch as a reenactor carefully places a bicorn on his head, adjusting it like a captain ready to set sail on a calm sea. The man's eyes twinkle with a sleepy enthusiasm, as if the hat holds the promise of 1,000 forgotten dreams. Historians still debate whether any of these reenactments capture the true spirit of Napoleon or if they're just good fun. Either way, the gentle humor is clear. The Postal Service, meanwhile, embraces the whimsy. In 1975, France issues a commemorative postal stamp series depicting various hats associated with Napoleon, from his iconic bicorn to lesser-known pieces that were once mistaken for his personal property. The stamps sell out quickly, accompanied by a wave of postcards adorned with hand-drawn hats and playful notes like "Return to Glory, ASAP." In living rooms and classrooms worldwide, you sense a shift. Napoleon's hats are no longer just lost artifacts or postal curiosities. They become symbols of nostalgia, humor, and a shared human story. They remind people that history isn't just battles and dates, but the strange, charming tales that slip between the cracks. A collector in Melbourne hosts Napoleon hat tea parties, where guests sip chamomile and nibble petits fours while sharing tales of misplaced hats and postal adventures. These gatherings feel like gentle time machines, whispering, laughing, and nodding off into the soft shadows of history. You find yourself wandering through these parties in spirit. You hear conversations about how hats became symbols of leadership, confusion, and even rebellion. A woman murmurs about a hat that inspired a poem she wrote after dreaming of a marching army of sleepy soldiers. A man recalls receiving a hat in the mail during a particularly difficult winter and how it became a talisman, a comforting weight on his coat rack during long nights. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of these hats is a collective memory or a cultural itch, a curiosity-driven compulsion to believe in a tactile link to the past. As the television documentary fades to black, you close your eyes and imagine the hats floating gently through the decades, resting briefly on the heads of admirals, schoolchildren, poets, and dreamers alike. Each hat carries a story, a question, a quiet invitation to wonder, and as you drift, you realize you become part of the story too. Now you're drifting into the digital age where stories no longer travel by mail but by bytes and signals. The hat's journey adapts, weaving itself into pixels and screens, quietly lingering in forums, blogs, and sleepy podcasts like this one. You scroll through a vintage history forum where enthusiasts swap tales of the lost bicorns and share blurry photos of hats found tucked in attic corners or displayed in tiny museums. Some hats are proudly claimed as genuine relics, others as affectionate recreations. The debates are warm and gentle, much like the hats themselves. One poster writes, "I found a hat in my grandfather's attic. It smells like mothballs and dreams." Another replies, "Mine came in a box labeled Return to Sender. No note, just a feather." Historians still debate the authenticity of these digital era hat sightings. Some argue the stories are modern inventions fueled by nostalgia and online camaraderie. Others believe the hats exist somewhere between myth and memory, a liminal space where history breathes softly. Meanwhile, artists and animators embrace the hat's symbolism. An animated short film surfaces online showing a sleepy Napoleon wandering through a world made of paper hats and postage stamps, tiptoeing past swirling letters and whispering envelopes. The animation is slow, meditative, almost hypnotic, perfect for a bedtime story. You imagine yourself watching this film, the soft colors and gentle narration coaxing you closer to sleep. In online marketplaces, bicorns appear in a variety of forms: handmade felt hats, quirky fashion accessories, even plush toys. Each item carries a whisper of the hat's vast, meandering history, blending the real and the imagined. A popular podcast episode titled "The Postal Hat That Traveled the World" goes viral among niche history fans, sharing tales of lost hats, confused postal clerks, and the absurd persistence of a simple piece of headwear. The episode's host remarks, "It's less about the hat itself and more about the stories we choose to carry with us." You nod as you listen, feeling the soothing rhythm of that sentiment. You recall earlier stories, the frantic mailroom in 1800s Paris, the poetic license of 20th century museums, the gentle acceptance of a world that cherishes whimsy over certainty, and you realize the hat has become a metaphor for history itself, a blend of fact and fiction delivered slowly, often misplaced, yet always carrying a message. You smile softly, knowing that as long as someone tells a story, even quietly, even sleepily, the hat will never truly be lost. You settle deeper into your bed, the weight of the bicorn light on your mind, the soft rustle of pages turning in the background. The hat, the postal nightmare, the legend, they all fade together like a gentle sigh. The story now winds gently toward its twilight, like the soft closing of a well-loved book. You find yourself in a quiet archive tucked away beneath layers of dust and fading ink. This is a place where time slows down and the past whispers softly, inviting you to listen. Here, among the fragile documents and faded photographs, you glimpse the full tapestry of the hat's journey, from an imperial accessory to a symbol carried by postmen, poets, pranksters, and dreamers. You imagine Napoleon himself, long gone, yet somehow present in each carefully crafted bicorn, every lost package, and each whispered rumor. Whether he was a genius strategist or just a man with a complicated hat collection remains a subject of gentle scholarly debate. You recall the postal workers who puzzled over strange deliveries, the museum curators who smiled knowingly at the exhibits, and the countless people who found comfort or curiosity in a piece of history shaped like a crescent moon. The Hat story is not a grand saga of battles won or lost, but a series of small moments, misplaced letters, whispered legends, and the simple joy of imagining. In these quiet moments, you feel a kinship with all those who carried the story forward, often unknowingly. You are part of that chain now, a link in the gentle passing of history. And as you breathe deeply, the story fades softly into the background hum of the night. Napoleon's hat, once a postal nightmare, has become a lullaby, a reminder that history can be strange, kind, and oddly comforting. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Good night. As you lie there, your breathing slows and your mind softens. The grand tales and small anecdotes fold into a quiet calm, like the gentle weight of a soft hat resting just above your brow. The world outside slips away, replaced by the hush of dreams and the soothing echo of history's gentle whispers. There is no rush here, only the slow unfolding of time and the comfort of stories that travel softly, like a letter sent with care. Sleep now comes easily, wrapped in the warmth of distant voices and the simple magic of a hat that carried more than just a head. It carried the imagination of countless sleepers before you. Sweet dreams.